You know, just because you're NEET doesn't mean you can't bring the heat. Hello everyone, SoberOni of G&A Reviews here, bringing you a spotlight for the servant voted most likely to be a part of the inevitable Fortnite collab, Summer Osakabehime. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers at how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. So if you're ready to squad up with Osakabe, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring my bell so that you can catch all of these spotlight videos as they go up, and you can help out the channel. But for now, onto Osakabehime's stats. Osakabehime has a max HP of 12,476 and a max attack of 8,895, which becomes 8,450 due to her archer class modifier. For an archer, Osakabehime has a very high HP stat, however she also has one of the lowest attack stats as well. This trend carries over to the general 4-star pool as well, where she has considerably above average HP for a 4-star servant, but poor attack. When it comes to her command cards, Osakabe has 4 hits on her quick card, 3 hits on her arts, 3 hits on her buster, and 5 hits on her extra card. She has an NP gain rate of 0.62% and a star rate of 8%. Clearly, Osakabehime's stats lean very heavily toward defense, which is more suited for supports and tanks rather than DPS servants. She does possess exceptionally high NP gain though due to her 3 arts cards and her high NP gain rate, and she also has decent star generating as well from her high hit counts. Taking a look at her skills, Osakabehime's first skill is Marksmanship FPS rank B. This skill grants her 1 hit or 1 turn of evasion, and it also increases her own crit damage for 3 attacks or 3 turns between 30 and 50% depending on level. Her second skill is Princess Summer Vacation False rank A. This skill increases the party's attack damage for 3 turns between 10 to 20% depending on level. It also grants the party Ignore Evasion for 3 turns, but as a demerit it does inflict Taunt on one enemy for 3 turns as well. And finally, Osakabe's last skill is Great Commander of Chiyogami rank EX. This skill increases her arts and buster card effectiveness for 3 turns between 20 and 30%, both depending on level. As for her passives, Osakabehime has Magic Resistance rank B, which increases her debuff resist by 17.5%, Independent Action rank A, which increases her crit damage by 10%, Divinity rank C-, which increases her own damage by 145, and Fortification Construction rank B, which increases her arch card effectiveness by 8% and reduces damage taken by 200. As for her deck and Noble Phantasm, Osakabehime has a mixed arts buster deck with quick arts buster and a buster Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Hakudojo Senshiki Mili Night Fever. It's an AoE buster attack that deals damage to all enemies with between a 300 and 500% damage modifier depending on level, and it also increases the party's buster card effectiveness for 3 turns between 20 and 40%, and their crit damage for 3 turns between 30 and 50%, both depending on overcharge. As a gun-toting gamer girl, it stands to reason that Osakabe needs quite a few bullets for her Ascension mats. For level Ascension, she needs 12 Void Dust, 24 bullets, 12 seashells, and 10 gears. Void Dust can be farmed at Charlotte in America, where it has a 64% drop rate. Bullets have a 65% drop rate at Yaga Smolensk in Lost Belt 1. Seashells are best found at the Observatory in Babylonia with a 40% drop rate, and gears have a 46% drop rate at Barrow Tower in Shinjuku. For skill Ascensions, Osakabe is going to need 36 bullets, 24 Void Dust, 12 Reactor Cores, and 20 arrowheads per skill. Reactor Cores drop from Prison Camp in Lost Belt 3 with a 20% drop rate, while arrowheads have a 40% drop rate at the God Skyboulder Ruins in Lost Belt 4. Moving from Assassin to Archer is quite the turnaround for most servants, but despite her new, more offensive class, Osakabehime still retains her very support-oriented stat spread. She has enough HP to almost compete with some 5-stars, and her NP gain is ridiculously good. She even has a good set of passives that provides everything from increased crit damage to buffing her arts cards. But in true support fashion, to compensate, her attack stat is abysmal, which in this case isn't the best thing, because despite her defensive stat spread, her skill set is decidedly built for offense. Her first skill, Marksmanship FPS, grants her 1 hit of evasion as well as a 50% buff to crit damage for her next 3 attacks. That's right, it's important to note that even though the skill does say the buffs last for 1 turn and 3 turns respectively, they also get used up after a certain amount of hits, which can make this skill tricky and difficult to use. That aside though, the crit damage that this skill gives is substantial, especially when combined with Osakabe's other steroids. The evade is nice to have as well, but since it's only 1 hit and doesn't even carry over to the next turn, you're primarily going to use this skill offensively. Luckily though, Osakabe has a much more reliable steroid in her other skill, Great Commander of Chiyogami. This skill gives her a 30% buff to arts and buster damage for 3 turns. That's quite good considering the low cooldown, so these buffs will be active for most of the battle, which is perfect for Osakabe because she relies on this buff heavily. The Buster buff gives her a nice boost to her NP damage, and considering that she can spam her NP, she can actually get some good mileage out of it. Speaking of which, the Arts buff combined with her passive gives Osakabehime a nearly 40% buff to her Arts card, which not only bolsters her face card damage and crit damage, but also accelerates her already strong NP gain. And if you were thinking that we were done with the damage steroids, you're wrong, because even Osakabehime's final skill, Princess Summer Vacation, is another damage buff. This time though, it's a party-wide 20% attack buff that also grants the party 3 turns of evasion pierce, but it does cast taunt on an enemy as a demerit. In short, this skill is basically a charisma, which also gives evasion pierce. Charisma by itself is a good, if underrated skill that works well for raising the team's DPS consistently. The evasion pierce on top of that is extremely good for the extra utility that it provides in boss fights. But what isn't good is the taunt. While it may not matter in some boss fights where there's just one enemy, it does significantly hamper Osakabe's support capabilities when she's in fights with more than one enemy, and she can easily screw over the entire team if the skill is misused. For skill priority, go with Great Commander first because of that massive arts buff, followed by her crit buff for additional damage, and then her charisma skill last. Osakabehime's Noble Phantasm is an AoE buster attack that has the side effect of buffing the party's buster and crit damage. And this is a pretty good Noble Phantasm, but not for the reason you'd think. Damage-wise, it's really weak, and it ranks among the weakest NPs in the entire Archer class. So even when fully buffed, don't expect Osakabehime to rely on this for wave clear or DPS. But what it is good for is the buffs that it gives. The buster and crit buffs are significant, even at just 100% overcharge, and they scale very well at higher overcharge. Furthermore, because Osakabehime has such a good NP gain, she can spam this NP and stack the buffs. This actually makes Osakabehime a decent option for Buster crit servants, much like her assassin version, because she's able to give such powerful stacking steroids to the team. She even has niche utility for challenge quests due to her short hit buff, which can completely counter some enemies that rely on evasion. Osakabe can also make use of these buffs herself to become a full-on crit DPS. Between her own crit buff, her Noble Phantasm, and her passives, she can reach anywhere between 90 and 110% bonus crit damage, or even more if she's able to Noble Phantasm multiple turns in a row. And as an archer, Osakabehime already has naturally high star weight, which means that she's going to crit fairly easily. So between the crit buffs and the party-wide damage steroids, Osakabehime fills the role of semi-support quite nicely, and she's versatile enough to squeeze into most Buster crit teams. She does have her fair share of downsides though, most notably her damage. She can put up decent numbers with some buff stacking, but that does require jumping through some hoops and isn't consistent enough. More often than not, due to her arts-focused deck, her low attack, and her weak NP, Osakabehime's DPS is awful compared to other offensive archers. And while her support buffs can be very good to compensate, they're also awkward to use and highly conditional. Her charisma comes with a taunt demerit that can sometimes make it very difficult to activate. Her crit and damage buffs require high overcharge or multiple NPs to be effective, and even her own self-crit buffs come with an oppressive 3-hit restriction. All of these restrictions can make Osakabehime a frustratingly slow and inconsistent support to use in practice. It isn't all bad for Osakabe though. As I mentioned, she has a versatile skill set, and while she may not be the best at everything, she can fit well into a variety of roles. If you want to build her more offensively to maximize her DPS, then she can be paired with servants who can buff crit damage and star generating, like her assassin version, Chiron, and Caesar. Osakabehime Assassin is a reliably good crit support who can bolster the crit damage of her archer version, while also providing a good amount of crit stars. Chiron is another good semi-support crit servant who gives Osakabehime extra crit damage, a star bomb, an arts buff, and additional utility. And Caesar is the best free-to-play option thanks to his good crit buff and his star bomb on his Noble Phantasm. For a more supportive role, it's better to pair Osakabehime specifically with high damage buster crit servants like Gilgamesh, Jaguar Warrior, and Summer Raiko. Gilgamesh is an excellent star generator and DPS on his own, but he doesn't have a buster buff or a crit damage buff, which means he benefits tremendously from both of Osakabehime's NP steroids. Similarly, Jaguar Warrior is a high DPS servant who suffers from long cooldowns, which can be alleviated by Osakabe's NP spam. And Summer Raiko is just a good flexible option since she can be an excellent DPS herself or double as a support for Osakabe. Osakabehime's Bond CE is the Setting Sun after a battle. It increases the party's arts and buster card effectiveness by 10%. Not a bad CE to use if you're using her as a support. Other good options include craft essences that can increase overcharge or generate stars, like 2030, Sweet Days, and Demonic Bodhisattva. When it comes to using Osakabehime as a DPS, it's best to give her CEs that can increase her crit damage, like Knight's Pride, Sailor in White, Another Ending, and Welcome Bunny. Increasing arch card effectiveness is always good in Osakabe because of her deck and because it enables NP spam easier, which she can use to stack more crit buffs. In the future, be on the lookout for the One Who Desires Salvation, which is the reward craft essence that we get for beating Lost Belt 5. It increases overcharge by 2 stages, so it's great for buff stacking with Osakabe. As for her command codes, aim for increasing arch card crit damage with command codes like Gakyo no Fude. Overall, Summer Osakabehime is a solid crit support and DPS. She has a versatile skill set that helps her support other crit servants, her NP has good utility and is very spammable, and she is a self-sufficient crit servant herself that can reach high buff numbers. However, she does suffer from an overall lack of damage compared to more focused DPS servants due to her low attack and NP damage, and her skill set can be slow and awkward to use, resulting in some consistency issues. So all in all, Osakabehime gets a B from me. She's best used as a side addition to a team that can serve as a semi-support alongside a better DPS and a better support. But if you're someone who loves high-powered buster crit teams, then you'll probably get a lot of use out of her. And those are my thoughts on Osakabehime. She isn't bad, but I would say the best thing about her is definitely that bikini. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over to Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.